Sorry the screen pretty much turned off, and sorry we pretty much had to end the video early, but sometimes our screens can turn on all the time. So basically, for Ole Miss and Oklahoma, I think Oklahoma's pretty much gonna have the upper hand in this one. Ole Miss pretty much hasn't got through the several rounds, but that's basically not the reason why we pretty much had to experience this. Even though Oklahoma got out in the first round last year, I have a feeling that they're gonna pretty much win the first round this year. Anyways, let's move on to Wisconsin and Oregon. And I think that Wisconsin's pretty much gonna have the upper hand. Oregon has been falling behind recently, so I think Wisconsin is going to the second round of this March Madness. Kansas State against UC Irvine. Now, UC Irvine has pretty much gone the NCAA tournaments. I can't recall how many times they've been in the NCAA tournaments, but Kansas State, however, is pretty much going to have the upper hand due to the fact that they're pretty much going to come in strong ever since their Elite Eight trip last year. So it's going to be Wisconsin against Kansas State in the second round. And oh yes, in the second round between 1-16 and 8-9, we have Virginia against Oklahoma. Anyways, let's get back to the here. So basically, we've got Villanova, the defending champion, against St. Mary's. Well, obviously, even though Villanova is pretty much the defending champion, I'm pretty much sure they can't say defending champion that much longer. I would say that St. Mary's would win, but since Villanova's pretty much got the upper hand based on how they did last year, I think they're going to pull it off in this one in a tight match. Next, we've got Purdue against Old Dominion. We pretty much going to have Purdue pull it off in this one against Old Dominion due to the fact that Purdue has been striving a lot lately in the NCAA tournament. So basically, Purdue is going to pull it off in this one. And we're going to have Villanova face off against Purdue in the second round of the March Madness 2019. Next, we've got Cincinnati against Iowa. Cincinnati was the 2 seed last year, in which they unfortunately fell to the 7th seed Nevada, which is fortunately in another bracket. Iowa pretty much strived a bit last year, going to the second round of the March Madness of 2016 a couple of years ago. However, since Cincinnati has been striving ever since their 2 seed bid in last year, I think that Cincinnati's going to pull it off in this one. For Tennessee and Colgate, there is probably no doubt who's going to win this one. Colgate has kind of probably not that much experience whatsoever, and Tennessee has been doing so well lately. Despite the fact that they lost to Auburn, I still think they're gonna pull it off in this one. So we're gonna have Cincinnati against Tennessee in the second round of the March Madness tournament. And that's it for the South. And finally, we're gonna do Midwest. First, we've got North Carolina against Iona, and there's basically not a chance that North Carolina is probably going to lose in this situation. North Carolina has been doing pretty well. I mean, they just faced Duke in the ACC title game, and they came so close. So that's why North Carolina is pretty much going to pull it off in this one. Next, we've got Utah State against Washington. Now, this is one of the fewest. This is a team that is basically. I think that this is their first bid to the NCAA tournament ever. So, basically, Utah State and Washington are going to face off. So, Utah State has been doing so well in the regular season. And I think that Utah State is actually going to win their first ever game of their NCAA tournament career. So, we've got North Carolina against Utah State in the second round. Next, we've got Auburn against New Mexico State. Now, I don't have that much upsets in my bracket. However, Auburn's pretty much gonna pull it off against New Mexico State. And when I said that I don't have that much upsets, like big upsets in my bracket, I'm not kidding. So Auburn's basically gonna pull it off in this one against New Mexico State. I think they actually did pretty well in the March Madness tournament last year. I think they made the Sweet 16 last year, in my belief. Next, we got Kansas against Northeastern. Now, Northeastern, I think they have just a teeny tiny bit. I think they have a teeny tiny bit of experience in the March Madness tournament. However, I think that Kansas is gonna pull it off in this one due to the fact that they're pretty much just like a big college, kind of like in sports technically. Kansas is pretty much gonna have the upper hand in this one based on how well they're doing, based on development and how popular they are pretty much getting. So it's Auburn against Kansas in the second round. Next, we've got Iowa State versus Ohio State. Now, Ohio State ended up becoming the 5 seed last year, and I think, however, Iowa State's pretty much gonna pull it off in this one. But Ohio State has been doing a bit well in this one, so I think that it's gonna be a tight match. So Iowa State's gonna pull it off in this one. And we'll be going to the second round. Anyways, we got Houston versus Georgia State. Now, Georgia State has pulled off a huge upset against Baylor back in 2015, back when R.J. Hunter was on the team. But, however, Houston has made some great progress ever since they actually lost against Michigan State, Michigan College, which was pretty unfortunate for them to lose on a last-second buzzer beater. But since Houston has done so well, I think they're going to move on in this one. So it's Iowa State against Houston in the second round of the Midwest tournament. Next, we've got Wofford against Seton Hall. Now, Wofford's pretty much just like a private school and they've done so well. And I think that this is their first ever time being in the NCAA tournament. Seton Hall has a bit of experience, but I don't think they're gonna do so well. So, Wofford's gonna move on in the second round, and for Kentucky against Abilene Christian, there's probably no doubt who you're probably gonna see in the second round of this March Madness tournament between Kentucky and Abilene Christian. I think that is gonna be Kentucky in this one. So, we're going to have Wofford against Kentucky in the second round of the Midwest tournament. Now, we're heading back to the East bracket for round number 2, which is March 23rd through 24th. We pretty much have Duke facing off against VCU, and based on how things are turning out, I think that Duke is pretty much going to win, so Duke is going to be in the Sweet 16. For Mississippi State against Virginia Tech, I think that Mississippi State has the upper hand, plus Virginia Tech has kind of like a teeny tiny bit of experience, but not that much, so Mississippi State is going to face off against Duke in the Sweet 16, which will be March 28th through 29. Next, we have Maryland against LSU, and based on how things turn out, I think that LSU is going to have a major chance of going to the Sweet 16. So they're in the second round. And we've got Minnesota against Michigan State. I don't really see an upset going all around here this lately. So Michigan State's going to the Sweet 16 of the March Madness tournament. So it's LSU against Michigan State in the Sweet 16. Now we're heading down to the West bracket, in which first off we're going to have Gonzaga against Syracuse. The last time these two teams have met was in 2016, when both were pretty much just double-digit seeds. They faced off in the Sweet 16, but Syracuse ended up winning. However, that's not going to be the case for this year, as Gonzaga is pretty much going to pull it off against Syracuse, in my opinion. So Gonzaga is going to go to the second round. And also, next we got Murray State against Florida State. Since Murray State is pretty much going to upset Marquette, in my opinion, which might not even happen, I think that Florida State's still going to pull it off. Florida State did make the Elite Eight last year, and they actually went on a pretty good run last year. Florida State's pretty much going to defeat Murray State in the second round and will be moving on to the Sweet 16 against Gonzaga. Next, we got Buffalo against Texas Tech. Now, Buffalo, they have improved so well over the last year. I mean, they just completely destroyed Arizona in the first round as a 13 seed. And Texas Tech, an Elite Eight representative last year. Texas Tech, I believe, might not be that strong, but I'm actually giving Buffalo a chance to go to the Sweet 16. And you know why? I think that Buffalo is actually strong enough to actually defeat Texas Tech, a team in the Elite Eight last year. So Buffalo, in my opinion, is probably going to move on. I'm actually giving Buffalo a chance. Yeah. So basically, Buffalo is going to the Sweet 16. And next we got Nevada against Michigan. Even though Nevada pretty much went to the Sweet 16 last year, facing a team like Michigan's going to be tough. So Michigan is probably going to pull it off this one, facing Buffalo in the Sweet 16. Now, we're heading down back to the South bracket, which is going to be Virginia against Oklahoma. Now, Virginia, even though they're going to be the 1 seed and are pretty much a bit better than before, I still think that they're pretty much not going to do that well and pretty much just become chokers once again, in my opinion, against Oklahoma. Even though they're not doing well, I still think that Oklahoma's going to win a tight one. So Oklahoma's going to the Sweet 16, in my opinion. So we got Wisconsin against Kansas State. Now, Wisconsin has been doing pretty well in the NCAA tournaments for the last couple of years, but Kansas State is actually representative in the Elite Eight last year, which is pretty impressive. So Kansas State, in my opinion, is going to move on. So it's going to be Oklahoma against Kansas State in my picks for the Sweet 16 in the South bracket. Next, we got Villanova against Purdue. Well, like I said earlier, I think that Villanova is not going to pretty much survive in defending their title. So I think that Purdue is going to pull it off in this one. Sorry, Villanova fans. Looks like your title's pretty much just been broke. Title defending champions. Looks like we're going to have a new reign this year. So Purdue's going to move on to the second round. Next, we got Cincinnati against Tennessee. Now, Tennessee has pretty much lost against Loyola Chicago last year. Too bad they're not in this tournament this year. But I'm predicting an upset from Cincinnati, who got which they lost on an upset themselves last year. So 2 teams on an upset that got upset last year. I'm actually predicting Cincinnati to go this time because I felt pretty bad for them. I mean, they played a really tight match and they just came so short. Well, that's it for the South bracket, and next we've got North Carolina against Utah State. Now, North Carolina, they have been doing pretty well, but I'm actually predicting Utah State's going to come up a bit close. It's going to be a tight one, but I think that North Carolina is going to pull it off, and they're going to go to the Sweet 16. Next, we've got Auburn versus Kansas. While Auburn's pretty much got a bit of experience, even though they defeated Tennessee like a week ago. However, Kansas is pretty much going to pull it off. They've got a lot more experience in the NCAA tournament. So it's going to be North Carolina against Kansas. Two, really good teams in their history of basketball in the Sweet 16. Next, we got Iowa State against Houston. I mean, Houston's done pretty well this year, especially since they've improved a lot ever since their defeat against Michigan. However, Iowa State's pretty much going to pull off a close one in an upset against Houston. So Iowa State's probably going to move on. For the last part of the Midwest bracket, so basically for the last part of the Midwest bracket, we pretty much have Wofford against Kentucky. Wofford has done pretty well, but I think that Kentucky is pretty much going to pull off this one. I think that they might win by high single digits. Yeah, I'm pretty much going to predict that Kentucky is pretty much going to pull it off in this one in a tight match. So basically, we're pretty much going to have Iowa State and Kentucky pull it off in this one. So that's it for the round of 32 in the Midwest bracket. And now we're going back to the East bracket for the Sweet 16. Okay, so for the Sweet 16, we have Duke against Mississippi State. And it's going to be a tight one, but I think that Duke's pretty much going to pull it off in this one. Unless Zion Williamson gets hurt or something, I'm pretty much sure that Duke's pretty much going to pull it off in this one. Anyways, for LSU against Michigan State, I'm actually sure that LSU's going to pull it off in this one. Michigan State's a pretty tough team, but I'm pretty much sure that LSU has got some really good players that Michigan State might not even handle against. So basically, it's LSU against Duke in the East Elite Eight. Next, we got Gonzaga against Florida State. Florida State has done pretty well for the past year, but I don't think that Gonzaga can actually lose against those guys. Gonzaga has done really well for the past several years, so Gonzaga is going to pull it off in this one, even though they just lost their West Coast Conference title. Next, we got Buffalo against Michigan. Buffalo has been doing pretty well for the past several years, but since Michigan is a really good team and they've still got Jordan Poole on their team, Michigan's pretty much going to pull it off in this one. So we've got Michigan against Gonzaga in the Elite Eight. Next, we've got Oklahoma against Kansas State. Kansas State is a good representative in the Elite Eight, and I'm pretty sure that Kansas State is going to pull it off against Oklahoma. Probably single digits or maybe double digits even. Next, we got Purdue against Cincinnati. Purdue's a really strong team, and I just don't think that Cincinnati's pretty much going to handle it at all. So Purdue's going to go to the South Elite Eight against Kansas State. So basically, next we got North Carolina against Kansas. North Carolina, in my opinion, they've done pretty well against Duke, which I think is going to do really well in the NCAA tournament. So North Carolina is pretty much going to pull it off against Kansas. Based on how they do this season, I'm pretty sure that North Carolina is going to make it this season. So Iowa State against Kentucky. I think that Kentucky's pretty much going to win this one. Based on how they do, I think that Iowa State's pretty much just not on that kind of level yet for the Elite Eight to happen to them. So for the Midwest, we've got Kentucky versus North Carolina. For the South bracket, we got Purdue against Kansas State. For the East, we've got Duke against LSU. And for the West, we got Gonzaga versus Michigan. Now, time for the Elite Eight. So basically, Duke against LSU. Now, LSU is pretty much gonna become a good team. But in my opinion, Duke is pretty much gonna overplay them based on the fact that they've got a lot of really good players that can basically just play everyone easily. So Duke is gonna go to the Final Four in Minnesota. So next we've got Gonzaga versus Michigan. Gonzaga is really striving well for the past few years, but I just don't think that they're probably gonna make it back to the Final Four this year like they made the national championship in 2017. So Michigan goes to the Final Four once again for the second year in a row. So it's Michigan against Duke in the Final Four. Next, we've got Kansas State against Purdue. Purdue's a pretty strong team, but I actually have faith in Kansas State. They have got a really good team, and I just think that they're pretty much going to overpower Purdue in a really tight match. So Kansas State is going to the Final Four as the South representative. And finally, we've got North Carolina against Kentucky. Now, both of these teams have played each other in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago in the Elite Eight. Now, North Carolina ended up winning that one on a shot by Luke May, who's still on that team. I think that North Carolina it's going to be a tight match, but I think North Carolina is pretty much going to pull it off in this one by 3 or so points. I think that Kentucky's played pretty well, but I'm just going to think they're not going to make it. So it's North Carolina against Kansas State in the Final Four and Duke against Michigan in the Final Four. So Michigan against Duke. Well, based on how the rosters turn out and based on the stats for this season, I just really think that Duke's pretty much going to do pretty well. I think that Zion Williamson is pretty much going to, overpower, most of the players. He's pretty much the favorite to go number 1 in the NBA draft this year. So, basically, he's probably going to become, a superstar in the making. So, Duke's going to go to the Final Four. The national championship. Representing the East in the Final Four. Next, we've got Kansas State against North Carolina. Basically, North Carolina and Kansas State have played pretty well for the past several years, but I think that North Carolina is pretty much at the next level for the NCAA tournament. Anyways, for the NCAA tournament national championship between Duke against North Carolina, I think that Duke is probably going to win by a score of 79 versus 75. I mean, both of these teams, they pretty much both have played pretty well for the past several years. So basically, I think Duke's pretty much got the upper hand based on roster stats. And it's basically just as close as it was in the ACC title game. Well, that's pretty much it for my analysis, and that is basically it for my predictions and my analysis on why I'm basically picking those teams. And this is Ollie Royce signing off, and peace!